Hello again. Well, it's the European Association for the Study of Diabetes. The clue is in the name. Study, research is absolutely essential to EASD. So to talk about all things research, I have with me the indefatigable Chantal Mathieu. Chantal, hello, all things research. Tell me about the ESD and research. I mean, it runs deep. It's very important.
Indeed, everybody knows our annual meeting and our efforts in education. But what many people forget is that we also have our foundation, the EFSD, where together with many sponsors from industry, for instance, ESD puts money into calls for research topics. So I invite everybody to go to esd.org and then look for EFSD. There's a myriad of different calls out there for research grants on very, very different topics in type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. There's a joint EUDF, EFSD call, for instance, on novel technologies. So if you are a member of ESD, you can apply for these fellowships, for these grants. So it's really in our blood, not only to communicate and disseminate about research, but also to fund research.
And what kind of money are we talking about?
Well, there's different types of money, ranging from a few tens of thousands of euros to hundred thousands of euros. So it's really worthwhile to go to the EFSD and check it out.
And does it also have kind of signposting, as it were, to other funding, other calls by, for instance, the European Commission or other funding agencies?
What we found is that EFSD is very often a jumping board to apply then for bigger grants in Europe or in other areas of the world. So our grants are not the big ERC grants, but they allow you to really, especially as a young investigator, to start up your group and to help your research to then further apply to these bigger grants.
Because you need a track record in order to go for those bigger grants. And of course, research is increasingly a collaborative, where it's not just within a country, but across Europe and indeed globally. So what are your tips, particularly for younger researchers, about setting up collaborative research?
Oh, it's so important nowadays. I mean, not even nowadays, always actually, to be a part of networks. It, first of all, is invigorating when you are able to work with other people, because 3 people have more ideas when they come together than just one person individually. So being part of networks is really essential nowadays, in particular for research. And also it lifts what you're able to do, because jointly applying for bigger grants increases your chances of getting these grants. So collaboration is key nowadays to doing research.
So when you're building a research team, what skills should you be looking for? I mean, obviously it's dependent on the particular project that you have in mind, but increasingly, for example, we are thinking of patients being in the mix right from the start. Social scientists, for instance, being involved.
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit on your topics, because you can have the real blue sky research where we're thinking mainly of mixes of researchers with skills that are complementary, where you have engineers, biomedical scientists, even doctors there. So that is the mix probably you need for blue sky research. Having a person living with the disease of relevance for your research in the mix, advising you on where you want to go, is also very stimulating for researchers, I can tell you. But if you go to more applied research, then it becomes even more important to have mixes of people with different profiles, with different skills, going from basic people to in academia, the translational researchers, the clinicians. And one of my big pet topics is also public-private partnerships, where academics come together with industry partners to really, in research, this final step, bringing applications to people living with the disease, there you need the industry also to come in. And as you said, people living with the disease, in case of diabetes, having people with type 1, type 2, depending on your topic, in the mix, will keep your focus, because they will continue to ask, what does it mean? And it's not what does it mean in lay language, but what does it mean? What is the impact of your research for me? And then they will guide you and give you feedback, and that's so important.
And you should never forget that actually patients can be an important pull, particularly for new devices and technologies. If they say this works and they enthuse about it to their friends, then it becomes a pull, a patient pull, rather than a constant push.
Oh, and do not underestimate the patient voice when it comes to deciding on research policy in your country, in your region, in Europe. Patient voice is essential. And therefore, it's so important that people living with diabetes continue to demand that also research funds are going to chronic diseases like diabetes, and not only cancer and neurodegenerative diseases, like is the big mantra nowadays. People living with diabetes should demand from their politicians that they put diabetes on the research agenda locally and in Europe and in the world, actually. And do not underestimate the power of the patients.
So how do you find the right collaborators? Because there are lots of people, let's say you're looking for a statistician or can I just mention physicists? I think physicists, they are often, in my experience, brilliant team members, because they have just such a wide range of skills, particularly, of course, in blue sky research. But it's trying to find which, physicist or statistician. How do you decide which one should be part of your team?
I'm happy you mentioned the statisticians, because they're another unloved species in the whole mix of researchers. And
no, we love a nice statistician.
So important, because if they get you on the right track from the beginning, you gain light years of failure. So absolutely, having this mix. How do you find your teammates?
Your love match.
Your love match. It's a little bit like these things where you date.
Tinder.
So you
Don't
first
use it
look.
myself.
I've never used it either. Never needed it. But anyway. But so you look at research. So you look at literature, where you look at the profiles, but then it's the contact. Meeting the person, talking to the person to see, is this a match? Do I feel right? Will I not be exploited in this scientific relationship? Because you also don't want to be in a team where you
do all the work,
doing all the work, and the others go on stage and say, this is what I've invented.
Yes.
So you really need, first of all, of course, to look in literature and see, this profile, this is the person I would need to work with me. But then also on a human basis.
And that actually, I think, goes to one of the real heart of actually why EASD and its meeting is so important. Because what you see constantly when we're there in person is people in corners having coffees, eating together, and it's the social glue that sort of kind of begins at ESD that's so important. So I think have a meal with somebody, because if you hate them after spending half an hour with them at a meal, then you are not going to be a good research collaborator.
Absolutely. And again, everybody will sigh when they listen to us at home, because that's what is missing in a virtual meeting.
Yeah.
We do our best. We have fishbowl, we have chat, we have all these things, but looking somebody in the eye and having a chat, sitting at a table, writing down on the back of a napkin or now on an iPad what the ideas are is so important. And I don't know how many consortia were started at a table in ESD. I, for instance, started several of consortia at a table at ESD. So that is what is important, namely this human interaction between teammates, finding your group.
What are the big issues facing research in Europe at the moment? I mean, funding is becoming harder. The European Commission now wants you to have many, many collaborators from right across Europe. That's a big part of European funding now, and there are some other issues, particularly with data sharing and that kind of thing.
We can talk an hour about hurdles. Data sharing, as you say, sample transport across countries, registries, and then the big word GDPR, the privacy rules. I think Europe did a good job in making the overarching rules, but then made one mistake, allowing all the countries to apply them in different ways. So Germany is different from Belgium, is different from France. And still, again, coordinating in ODIA, one of these IMI consortia, you can make it work in Europe. Once you start talking about sharing samples or data across the Atlantic with US partners, oh my gosh.
Yes, it's another world. It's another world of pain, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But let's talk registries in particular, because I've heard registries mentioned again and again already in our conversations for ESD TV. And it's really important, particularly for those rarer conditions. I mean, for instance, we were talking about people who are unaware of impending hypoglycemia. So to have registries of all those conditions across Europe becomes then an extraordinary data resource.
Yeah, it's one of the mantras of the European Diabetes Forum, and I invite people this afternoon to our symposium about registries and their importance for diabetes. And the title is "It Takes More Than a Registry," because registries, data, knowing your enemy is the basis. But then you need to do something with the data. You need to use it for your research. You need to use it to adapt your policy in a country. So it's not just about collecting data and hoarding the data and saying, "Ooh, I have a registry of 500,000 people. So what if you don't do anything with it?" So it's not only about registries and all the rules and regulations of who owns the data, etc. But it's even more what you do with the data and how you apply it in research, how you apply it in organizing care, etc.
And let's remember why patients agree to give their data. They want their data to be used.
Yes, and what you say is so important and has gotten me out of many discussions on GDPR unscathed, and that's patients, the people with the disease, own their data. It's theirs. And so they can decide. And if you inform them properly, you have an easier life, because people want you to use their data.
They get mad if you don't use their data.
They want you to use it to prevent type 1, type 2, to cure type 1, type 2. So they're offering, if you look at Inodia, again, we have more than 5,500 people voluntarily giving blood, giving urine, other samples, just to help prevent and cure type 1 diabetes. So people are willing to give samples and data, and having the concept that they own them is very important, because that gets you a long way.
In one or two words, are you optimistic about the future of research in diabetes?
I'm always optimistic. The glass is always half full. And I'm optimistic because I see the bright young researchers around me. I see the rising stars at ESFD. I see the young PhDs in the lab having aha moments. You know, that's the best moments in your life when you find something. And I see that happening. So there I'm optimistic. I'm a bit more pessimistic when it comes to funding and keeping diabetes on the funders' agenda, on the policymakers' agenda. And that's where we need the voice of people living with diabetes to be loud and to be in harmony together with the researchers and the clinicians, everybody, industry, all singing in a big harmonized choir to the policymakers saying, we need your money to go into research on diabetes.
Chantal Mathieu, thank you so much for talking to us. Well, there you are. Researchers, industry, patients, they are all needed to sing together to the policymakers to say that research into diabetes is critically important, as indeed it is. See you later.